Good morning. Wasn't that a wonderful worship experience? I really appreciate it. Just a few comments about what we'll be doing in this session. I've been asked to, in essence, talk about the why of this Peace Colloquy, connect it to the mission of the church. I want you to also be aware that this presentation is being videotaped because it is also an address to the whole church. It will be distributed throughout the church as a way of exploring the mission initiative, Abolish Poverty in Suffering. We're also proceeding at translations speed. So Spanish and French translations are occurring, and I have been told that translation speed is even slower than I usually speak. So I will try. On behalf of World Church leaders, welcome to this Peace Colloquy. When we first introduced the mission initiative, Abolish Poverty in Suffering, I expected the first question to be, how will we do this? I was surprised when some of the initial reactions included questions like, why should abolishing poverty be a priority for the church? And why should we emphasize alleviating poverty when Jesus said in Matthew 26, "You'll have the poor among you always"? We've addressed Jesus' statement in the 2014 Adult Reunion study text and an article in the August Herald. The conclusion is Jesus would be very frustrated and chagrined to know that we might use his turn of a phrase from Deuteronomy chapter 15 to in any way justify or tolerate poverty today. But since then, I've thought more about the why question. While there's not time for a full exploration of this question, I want to present a quick review of some reasons why we are called to abolish poverty. To begin with, it is a scriptural mandate that reflects God's will. It has been said if we cut out all biblical passages that address how we should relate justly and compassionately to people who don't have what they need to survive and flourish or thrive, there wouldn't be much Bible left. When proclaiming his mission, Jesus said, "I have come to bring good news to the poor and to let the oppressed go free." Luke 4:18. When his disciples were concerned about feeding a hungry crowd, Jesus responded by saying, "You feed them." Jesus' teaching about eternal judgment focused on how nations and individuals treated the hungry, unclothed, sick, imprisoned, and dispossessed. Matthew 25. The biblical mandate is also supported by our Restoration Heritage scriptures. A primary theme of the Book of Mormon is about how we should relate compassionately and justly to the poor. The Doctrine and Covenants certainly sounds a similar call. From Doctrine and Covenants 163, 4a, God, the eternal Creator, weeps for the poor, displaced, mistreated, and diseased of the world because of their unnecessary suffering. Such conditions are not God's will, for in their welfare resides your welfare. Our mission challenges us to act. Our mission statement is, we proclaim Jesus Christ and promote communities of joy, hope, love, and peace. Poverty is not the good news of Jesus Christ to the poor. Poverty does not promote communities of joy, hope, love, and peace. The enduring principles of the church compel us. All of the enduring principles, like grace and generosity, sacredness of creation, worth of all persons, and pursuit of peace, demand response to the plight of those trapped in poverty. The cause of Zion, part of the founding vision of this movement, encourage and challenges us to respond. No matter how we envision the cause of Zion, the following description applies. They dwelt in righteousness, and there was no poor among them. Doctrine and Covenants 36. Note, righteousness and no poor are part of the same condition. They're not separable. Also, we're accountable to ourselves. Our own words call us through World Conference resolutions. World Conference Resolution 1064, entitled Social, Economic, and Moral Problems, includes a concern for, quote, economic welfare of individuals. World Conference Resolution 1148, passed in 1978, established the World Hunger Fund, and that the church should facilitate accumulation of funds to combat world hunger and support food security advocacy. World Conference Resolution 1161, passed in 1980, entitled Human Freedom and Justice, includes the following. We consider it a requirement of the gospel. A requirement of the gospel to proclaim justice and eliminate all inhumane conditions which nations and people heap upon the poor. Our own words. Our history provides important perspective. During the Restoration era of the early 1800s, church members were certainly among the poor. At times, because of local economic conditions and because of persecution and conflict, Our faith ancestors went without adequate funds, employment, homes, and land. The church's future was preserved by the compassionate acts of others who offered food, shelter, medical care, and jobs. Because of our historical memory, we should have a special concern for people living in poverty today. What about poverty as a moral or ethical issue? Stephen C. Smith, in his book, Ending Global Poverty, What Works, stated, "Global poverty is the scourge and disgrace of our affluent era, but we can effectively end extreme poverty in our times. The starting point is the awareness of these basic facts. The dimensions of extreme poverty are enormous, but an equal amount of progress has already been made. And although an end to global poverty is not inevitable, with redoubled commitment, we can end extreme poverty in one generation." And you're going to hear that message time and time and time again this weekend. Ending global poverty is possible because we have the know-how and the economic capacity. But ending global poverty is not inevitable. These two facts create a moral responsibility to act. Global poverty is a major pastoral concern of Community of Christ. A majority of our worldwide church members live in poverty. And that means a majority of our church members live in poverty. They are beloved sisters and brothers in Christ. As a church, we need to respond with a sense of urgency to their plight, just like we would respond to unnecessary suffering in our own immediate families and in our local congregation. Here is an interesting perspective that Henri Nouwen offers. The church needs to minister with the poor, and notice I said with, to stay true to its nature and calling. Let me read a quote. "How do we prevent corruption in the church?" he writes. The answer is clear. By focusing on the poor. The poor make the church faithful to its vocation. When the church is no longer the church with the poor, it loses its spiritual identity. It gets caught up in disagreements, jealousy, power games, and pettiness. The poor are given to the church so the body of Christ can be and remain a place of mutual concern, love, and peace. Interesting perspective. Also, we want to support all of those who are working to abolish poverty right now. We've been counseled as a church that we are to be in the midst of and on the forefront of such organizations and movements. The United Nations Millennium Development Goals, called MDGs, are 8 goals for improving life adopted by the world's countries and leading development agencies. The first Millennium Development Goal is to reduce extreme poverty and hunger, as you've heard, by 1/2 by 2015. That goal has already been achieved. Now, the United Nations and its partners are drafting a post-2015 development plan with new goals. And that is to reduce poverty again by 1/2 by 2030. Surely, we want to be part of that kind of successful global action for the common good. And that is where our mission initiative takes us. We could add additional reasons, but let me see if I can summarize. Just like Reverend Beckman did last night, why work to abolish poverty? Because it's God's will. It's God's will. And actually, the question for a prophetic people is not, why should we abolish poverty? The prophetic question is, why is there poverty? And that's the shift that needs to occur in community of Christ. That is the question on which we need to focus. And this Peace Colloquy will help the whole church do that. Another important question for us is, what is poverty? The global definition of extreme poverty is living on less than $1.25 U.S. equivalent per day. That's the definition for most of the world. In developing nations of the Western world, the definition is about $51 to $63 U.S. equivalent per day. It's not enough to survive. $1.25, but somehow many families do. Approximately 1.1 billion people live below the extreme poverty line. We do want to note that as part of the progress being made, 1 billion people have come out of extreme poverty in the last 20 years. That number has been reduced by 1 billion. Another definition of poverty is lack of adequate food, clothing, shelter, health care, and employment. So this definition is about lack or inadequate access to basic living needs. However, this definition is inadequate because it does not consider what is necessary to develop and flourish as a human being. A more complete definition of poverty identifies interrelated factors that entrap people in poverty and work to keep them there. From material prepared by our affiliate organization, Outreach International, we read, in many instances, poverty results from a systematic network of economic, cultural, political and social systems, how they integrate, relate, and seem to work against those less fortunate. Also, the lack of genuine participation of the poor within these various systems can serve as both the cause and effect that lead to conditions of poverty. The poor are often caught in a culture of silence. A culture of silence. From the book Ending Global Poverty, which obviously we're recommending and references, A Guide to What Works, and several other sources that we've been studying, we gain insight into the factors that create and sustain poverty traps. And that's a term we need to become very familiar with. Not just the word poverty, but the phrase poverty traps. And for just a moment, I'm going to walk you through a number of different factors that contribute to poverty traps. And my purpose is not for you to memorize all of these or list all of these. The illustration is to see and experience the list itself. Lack of access to clean water. Children have to work for families to survive. Therefore, they are not in school getting a basic education, even if they could afford a basic education or have access to a basic education. Economic underdevelopment or poor economic development in the nation where they live, and failed governments. Cultural barriers to equal rights for women. That's right. Sorry, guys. But it's now proven that when women are empowered and given a voice and have access to resources, life becomes better for everyone in the family, in the village, and surrounding areas. This is a principle that is foundational to efforts to combat poverty. No access to any kind of credit or insurance. If there is access to one who will loan funds, typically they're immoral lenders, and they keep raising the interest rate so that you're forever caught in debt. Ideal climates for malarial mosquitoes and other infectious carriers. Chronic undernutrition, hunger, and disease. Those go together. Low vocational skills because of no training, or even if there is training, there's no market for those skills. High birth rates as security. The more children I have, the more likely I am to have some children who can take care of me. There's no system there for social security. And so I have as many children as I can, knowing that some of them are probably not going to survive. Subsistence farming, corruption and criminality, lack of mental health services. There's a lot of depression and anxiety when you're living in grinding poverty, and you're caught in poverty traps. The powerful rich who benefit from keeping others trapped in poverty. And that's just some of the factors that conspire together to create poverty traps. And that's the key concept, is understanding that it's multidimensional and there are many factors at work that keep people trapped in poverty. So with the concept of poverty traps in mind, how do we effectively alleviate poverty? Here are some foundational principles that we have learned as a church and are applying, and they're very important to our decisions about the kinds of efforts that we're going to be involved in. First, do not blame the poor for being caught in poverty traps. The cynicism of society often scapegoats the poor for their suffering, and they're also scapegoated for other problems in society. How would you like to live under that kind of burden? Second, strategic approaches to alleviating poverty must be multifaceted and not just devoted to a single issue or a single factor. Remember the list of factors and the concept of poverty traps. Third, we must understand that abolishing poverty entails much more than giving money or things to those trapped in poverty. This approach can actually build dependency, and more importantly, it disempowers people from exercising their own initiative. The most successful strategies for helping people escape poverty start by helping them identify their assets and how to build on them. By assets, we do not mean income or tangible resources only. By assets, we're talking about human capacity. What a person, family, or village is, what it can be, what it can become. The capacity is there. How do we free it? Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, efforts to abolish poverty must be based on willingness to walk with the poor. To walk with the poor. It's not what we do to the poor. It's walking with the poor. It's engaging in genuine relationships that transform us as individuals and as a church. It's all about community building. It may be hard to understand it from that perspective, but it's about walking with the poor and being transformed in the relationship. So with this background in mind, what is our goal for this Peace Colloquy? Our goal is that Community of Christ will gain sufficient motivation, insight, and experience to focus our resources and efforts on proven approaches that will have the greatest long-term effectiveness. That's our goal. To gain sufficient motivation, insight, and experience so we can focus our efforts and our resources on proven approaches that will have the greatest long-term effectiveness. The colloquy is designed to move us through several phases of opening up, of opening our eyes and ears, growing in our awareness of the reality of what it's like to be caught in poverty. That's why you have available to you a poverty simulation at this Peace Colloquy. Open our hearts, confession, and compassion. As we open our eyes and ears, we begin to understand our own lack of awareness and perhaps even complicity in attitudes and systems that keep people trapped in poverty. So we will be confessing, and already have been this weekend. Open our minds, education, more experience. There are organizations that are offering workshops during the Peace Colloquy that have knowledge and experience that's needed. Good intentions are not enough to combat poverty. We need to learn more. We need to know what to do. We also need to know what not to do. Open our arms and hands. Collaborative action with others, not just individual efforts, but community involvement in strategic partnerships with other organizations. Now, every element of this colloquy has been carefully designed to open us up, to open our eyes and ears, to open our hearts, to open our minds, to open our arms and hands. And that's what this experience is all about. Now, as you prepare to go to the various presentations and workshop sessions, to make sure that we glean as much knowledge and insight and experience as possible, I'm going to urge you to ask these questions of the workshop presenters. So there's some nervous folks right now. What is this organization or ministry doing to abolish poverty? That's the what question. Or why is this organization seeking to abolish poverty? What is this organization doing to abolish poverty? How does this approach apply proven principles of abolishing poverty? How do you evaluate or measure your results? What are your results? So those are key questions to have in mind. Why? What? How? Evaluation and measurement. And what are your results? There's also a workshop that's hosted by the presidency and members of the presiding bishopric that is entitled Exploring Innovative Ideas for Alleviating Poverty. And that's going to be an open conversation about ideas that people have about what the church could be involved in relation to alleviating poverty. thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a very interesting and productive weekend.